The train screamed as it slowed into the small frontier town of rBride, its iron wheels grinding against the rails while steam rolled across the wooden platform like fog. The townspeople had gathered long before the train arrived, standing in small groups with curious eyes and crooked smiles. Everyone in rBride had heard about it. Another mail-order bride arriving from the east. And whenever one of those trains came, the town treated it like entertainment. Men leaned against posts outside the saloon. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Boys climbed barrels just to see better. Sheriff Collins spat tobacco into the dirt. "Poor girl," he muttered. "Why's that?" the barber asked beside him. The sheriff shrugged. "Most of them come expecting a husband. Half the time the man don't even show." A whistle shrieked again as the train finally stopped. Steam hissed. The conductor stepped down first, then the passenger doors opened. A few travelers stepped onto the platform, traders, a tired mother with 2 children, and a preacher carrying a worn Bible. Then she appeared. A young woman carefully stepped down from the train. She wore a simple gray traveling dress that had been neatly mended in several places. Her dark hair was pinned back, though the long journey had loosened a few strands around her face. In her hands she carried a small suitcase that looked older than she was. Her name was Clara Whitfield, and the moment her shoes touched the platform, the whispers began. "That's her? That's the mail-order bride? She's smaller than I thought." A few men laughed quietly. Clara heard every word, but she kept her chin raised as she stepped forward and looked around the crowded platform. Her heart pounded inside her chest. Somewhere in this town was the man who had written the letters, the cowboy who promised her a home. A man named Ethan Walker. For months they had exchanged letters arranged through a marriage agency back east. His words had been simple but honest. "I own land outside rBride. Life here is hard but honest. If you come west, you will have a home and my respect." Clara had read that letter 100 times. Respect. That was more than she had ever been offered before. She scanned the crowd, but no one stepped forward. The conductor glanced at her. "You waiting for someone, miss?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Name?" "Ethan Walker." The conductor scratched his beard. "Don't see him." A ripple of laughter spread through the watching crowd. One man near the saloon called out loudly, "Looks like your cowboy forgot about you." More laughter followed. Clara's fingers tightened around her suitcase handle. Another man stepped closer with a smirk. "You sure he didn't take one look at you and change his mind?" Someone else added, "Maybe the poor girl got the wrong town." The crowd chuckled again. Clara felt the heat rising in her face, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of strangers. She had already endured enough humiliation in her life before boarding that train. A woman near the edge of the crowd whispered loudly to her friend, "Mail-order brides always look so desperate." Clara slowly turned away from them. The conductor checked his watch. "Train leaves again in 10 minutes, he said. "If your man ain't here, you might want to get back on." The words struck her like a stone. Back on the train. Back to the city where no one wanted her. Back to the small room she had rented above a bakery while struggling to survive. Her chest tightened. Maybe the town was right. Maybe Ethan Walker had changed his mind. She took a slow breath and lifted her suitcase again. The conductor stepped aside to allow her back toward the train. Behind her, the mocking voices grew louder. "Guess the cowboy didn't want her after all. Can't blame him. Poor thing." Clara placed one foot onto the train step, and then a deep voice cut through the crowd. "Stop!" The entire platform went silent. Boots struck the wooden boards as someone pushed through the gathered townspeople. A tall cowboy stepped forward. He was broad-shouldered, sunburned from long days under the western sky. A worn hat shadowed his sharp eyes, and a revolver rested calmly at his hip. The laughter died instantly. Everyone in rBride knew that man, Ethan Walker. He walked straight toward the train. Clara slowly turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan's eyes moved over her face as if confirming something he had already known. Then he looked at the conductor. "She ain't getting back on that train." The conductor raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Ethan stepped closer and reached for Clara's suitcase. "She's mine." The crowd gasped. Clara blinked in surprise. "You're Ethan Walker?" "Yes." His voice was calm, steady, but his eyes flashed briefly toward the men who had been mocking her. "And anyone who has a problem with that," he added quietly, "can say it to me." The crowd suddenly found the ground very interesting. No one spoke. Even the loudest men near the saloon lowered their eyes. Clara looked at Ethan carefully. "You're late," she said softly. A flicker of guilt crossed his face. "Horse threw a shoe 5 miles out," he explained. "Took longer to walk back than I thought." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. The conductor chuckled. "Well, looks like the bride's claimed." Ethan turned back toward Clara. "You still want that home I wrote about?" She hesitated. Behind her, the train hissed as steam rose into the afternoon air. Ahead of her stood a cowboy who had just silenced an entire town for her. "Yes," she said. Ethan tipped his hat slightly. "Then let's go." He lifted her suitcase and led her down the platform. The crowd parted without a word. As they reached the edge of town, Clara glanced back once more at the train slowly pulling away. Her old life disappeared with it down the tracks. But as Ethan helped her onto his horse wagon, she noticed something strange. He hadn't looked at her the way the others had. There was no pity, no judgment, just quiet certainty. The wagon rolled out of Redridge toward the open prairie beyond town. For a while they rode in silence. Finally, Clara asked, "Why did you say I was yours like that?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Because you are." She blinked. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." "How?" He glanced at her briefly. "I read every letter you sent." Clara looked down at her hands. "So you didn't change your mind when you saw me?" Ethan frowned slightly. "Why would I?" She hesitated. "People usually do." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "Well," he said calmly, "those people aren't me." The wagon creaked along the dirt road as the town disappeared behind them. Clara felt something unfamiliar growing quietly in her chest. Hope. But neither of them noticed the two men standing near the far end of the train platform, watching the wagon leave town. One of them folded his arms. "That her?" The other nodded slowly. "Yep." The first man smirked. "Then the boss is going to want her back." He turned toward the road where Ethan's wagon had vanished. "Because that girl ain't just a mail-order bride." The second man asked quietly, "Then what is she?" The first man's smile darkened. "She's worth a fortune." The words hung in the air as the two men continued watching the wagon disappear down the dusty road. The taller of the two spat into the dirt. "Boss said bring her back alive," he muttered. "And the cowboy?" The man shrugged. "If he gets in the way, that's his problem." They turned and disappeared into the crowd as the last sound of the train faded into the distance. Miles outside Redridge, Ethan's wagon rolled steadily across the open prairie. The land stretched wide and quiet under the golden afternoon sun, broken only by patches of tall grass and distant hills. Clara sat beside him, holding the edge of the wooden seat as the wagon bounced over uneven ground. "You live far from town?" she asked. "About 10 miles. "That's very quiet." "That's the point." Clara smiled slightly. She understood that feeling. After everything she had been through, quiet sounded like a gift. The road curved along a shallow ridge, and soon a small ranch appeared in the distance. A wooden cabin stood near a red barn, surrounded by fenced pasture where a few horses grazed peacefully. Ethan slowed the wagon. "That's home." Clara looked at it carefully. It wasn't large or fancy. The paint had faded from years of sun and wind, and the fence needed repairs in places. But the cabin looked strong, steady, safe. Ethan helped her down from the wagon. For a moment, she simply stood there, looking at the wide open land stretching beyond the ranch. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. Ethan shrugged. "It's honest land." He carried her suitcase inside the cabin. The interior smelled of wood smoke and leather, and the furniture was simple but well kept. Clara stepped inside slowly. "You live here alone?" "Yes." "For how long?" "5 years." She turned toward him. "That must get lonely." Ethan leaned his rifle against the wall. "Sometimes." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "I can cook," she said, "and sew, and I'm not afraid of work." Ethan looked at her. "I didn't bring you here to work." Her brow furrowed. "Then why?" He hesitated before answering. "Because I meant what I wrote in those letters." Clara's eyes softened slightly. Before she could respond, the distant sound of hooves echoed across the prairie. Ethan's head turned instantly toward the window. Riders, more than one. He stepped outside onto the porch, his eyes narrowing as 2 horses approached the ranch at a fast pace. Clara followed him to the doorway. The riders stopped near the gate. They were the same 2 men from the train station. The taller one swung down from his horse and smiled coldly. "Well now," he said, "looks like we found her." Clara's face went pale. Ethan stepped slightly in front of her. "You lost?" he asked calmly. The man chuckled. "Not at all." He pointed toward Clara. "We're here for her." Ethan's expression didn't change. "She's not going anywhere." The second rider spoke up. "Listen, Cowboy, you don't understand. That girl belongs to a man back east." Clara shook her head quickly. "No, that's not true." The tall man ignored her. "She ran away from someone very powerful." Ethan crossed his arms. "Doesn't sound like my problem." The man's smile faded. "It will be." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. A wanted notice. Clara's name was written across the top. Below it was a reward. $3,000. Ethan glanced at the paper, then back at the man. "Big money," the man said. "All we gotta do is bring her back." Clara's hands trembled. "They're lying," she whispered. "Please don't believe them." Ethan didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on the bounty hunters. "You finished talking?" he asked. The tall man frowned. "Not quite." He took a step closer. "Hand her over, Cowboy. No one gets hurt." Ethan slowly stepped off the porch. His boots hit the dirt with quiet certainty. "She stays." The second man laughed. "You planning to fight both of us?" Ethan's hand rested lightly near the revolver on his hip. "If I have to." The wind blew across the prairie. For several long seconds, no one moved. Finally, the tall bounty hunter sighed. "Fine," he muttered. He climbed back onto his horse. "But this ain't over." He pointed a finger toward Clara. "Men are already looking for you, and sooner or later, someone's going to collect that reward." The riders turned their horses and galloped away across the hills. Silence returned to the ranch. Clara exhaled slowly, her legs shaking. "They'll keep coming," she said. Ethan nodded. "Probably." She looked at him nervously. "You should let me go." "No. You could get hurt because of me." Ethan finally turned toward her. "You ran from something bad, didn't you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "A man back east tried to force me to marry him," she explained. "When I refused, he told people I owed him money. Now he's paying men to bring me back." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And the reward?" "He wants to make sure someone finds me." Ethan stared out across the wide prairie. Then he said quietly, "Good luck to them." Clara looked at him in surprise. "You're not afraid?" Ethan shook his head. "I've fought worse than bounty hunters." She studied his face carefully. "You barely know me." "I know enough." "How?" Ethan looked at her again. "The way you stepped off that train." She blinked. "What about it?" "You didn't cry when they laughed at you." Clara lowered her eyes. I've had practice. Ethan gave a small nod. Then he said something that made her heart skip. You're tougher than half the men in Redridge. For the first time since leaving the train station, Clara laughed. A real laugh. The sound drifted across the quiet ranch under the fading evening sun. But far away on the road back to town, the two bounty hunters rode hard toward Redridge, because they knew something Ethan didn't yet realize. The man who wanted Clara returned wasn't just rich, he was dangerous. And he had already sent more men west, men who wouldn't stop until the mail-order bride, who had been mocked on the platform, was dragged back in chains, or the cowboy protecting her was lying in the dirt beside her.